I met Joshua when he was 6 months old. He already had a problem list that was about 6 pages long. His caregiver looked exhausted. She placed what's called a 7-day order. This meant that she had notified Joshua's social worker that she could no longer care for him, that he was just too much. Now there were 7 days to find Joshua a new home. But the problem was Joshua had already had 5 homes. It was getting harder and harder to place him, and he was 6 months old. The inconsolable crying, the failure to grow, the vomiting, the inability to sleep, the tremors and the shaking, the constant movement and the constant irritability. It was all too much to see and too much to care for. At this timely and important conference, we have the opportunity to learn about the very integrated relationship between the brain and the body. I feel so privileged to be a part of this body of friends and colleagues who not only understand the importance, but also underscore the impact that both physical and mental health have on our well-being and essentially on how we experience life. How our choices and experiences and our actions, and ultimately how we will live, how we feel emotionally and physically, how we think, whether we have hope or no hope, and our spirituality. What an important time this is, that we can be here together to learn from each other, to broaden our knowledge and our skills so we can impart your brain, your body to our communities around the world. I am so grateful for this opportunity to share with you today about a topic that has a special place in my heart. One of the most impactful and intertwined aspects of the brain and body is that of addiction. Now, prior to smartphones, there may have been some of us who could get away with saying that we didn't quite understand addiction. But I don't think we can say that anymore. I am quite sure that each of us can appreciate that addiction, particularly addiction to substances, is one of the most critical brain-body relationships that impacts individuals, families, communities, and our global society. Drug addiction has impacted all of our communities globally. It devastates our health, physical and mental. It impacts economics, safety, families, and children. Children are often the silent victims of addiction. They're exposed to substances, risky environments. They have a high risk for being neglected or abused. Over 80% of children who go in the United States foster care system are there because of addiction in the home. They are extremely high risk for themselves becoming substance users, as we know the cycle of intergenerational abuse. What we face now is an opioid catastrophe. While the United States is 5% of the world's population, it consumes 80% of the global supply of opioids. However, this is a global epidemic with continents and countries around the globe impacted by opioid addiction. Northern Ireland, Germany, Canada, Australia, and Japan are some of those countries with the highest addiction rates behind the United States. But frankly, this has impacted all areas of our globe, and it is a crisis. And sadly, it is also impacting infants. Infants who've been exposed to substances in utero are born with a drug experience that impacts their brain and their body. These infants suffer from neonatal abstinence syndrome. Neonatal abstinence syndrome is a disorder that affects 4 major systems in the body. It affects the central nervous system, the gastrointestinal system, the autonomic nervous system, and the respiratory system. A baby who is born exposed to these substances present with mild to moderate severe symptoms in these areas that impact the major components of life, which is elimination, eating, and sleep. There are symptoms or signs of crying, irritability, tremors, shaking, vomiting, spitting up, etc. While NAS, or neonatal abstinence syndrome, is typically used to describe infants born exposed to opioids, virtually every infant exposed to substances in utero will have signs along a continuum of withdrawal. While these signs typically manifest themselves in infancy, they can also impact that individual through their childhood and actually throughout life. Because there are so many babies with NAS, like Joshua, some of us who work with these babies day after day want to help others to make a difference in the life of these infants. I and Rena Consulting are grateful for the support and partnership with the International Commission for the Prevention of Alcoholism and Drug Dependency, the ICPA, along with several transdisciplinary experts in the development of a resource kit to assist high-risk infants. Promptly treating an infant with NAS and/or prenatal drug exposure will help them to maximize the best immediate and long-term outcome. The resource kit is there to offer assistance to providers, health providers, as well as to be a resource for caregivers and parents. With the tools in the resource kit, we were able to help Joshua maintain his placement, and he is now adopted in that home. While the kit isn't finished yet, it is the goal of ICPA to make this resource available to our global community. But now I'm thinking, many of you are saying, but why care about infants? We're at your brain, your body, we're talking a lot about other things. I'm sure infants don't cross many of our minds a lot of the time, but let me share with you a few thoughts on this. It is non-refutable that what happens to us when we are young impacts us throughout our life. And in fact, adversity in childhood, the toxic stress of it actually impacts the architecture of our brain. There has been a significant amount of attention on the consequences of childhood experiences, largely due to a study called the ACE study, or Adverse Childhood Experiences. If you don't know this study, I would encourage you, because there's going to be presentations on it here at this conference, that you learn about it or you read up about it. I'll be only able to talk about it very briefly here. But it's one of the largest studies that address the relationship between childhood trauma and mental and physical health outcomes later in life. One of the major findings of this study showed that the greater the number of adverse experiences in childhood, the greater the risk of early adult disease and death from any cause. It offers us that many chronic diseases of adults are determined in our childhood, not by disease, but by what happened to us. This is truly a validation of your brain, your body. The ACE study defined itself in 10 categories. 5 were the 5 listed of abuse and neglect, and the other 5 were identified as household dysfunction, where there was domestic violence, substance use, mental health illnesses, parental separation, incarceration. That for any one of these situations, if it had happened in your life, at any point, you would get a score of 1. If it never happened, it would be 0. So your score would be from 0 to 10. What's really also amazing about this study is that the statistics showed that with every single score, every single experience, whenever another experience was added, it would increase your risk of health problems in a graded fashion. And a graded fashion statistically means that a 1 is more significantly impactful than a 0, that a 3 is more impactful than a 2, that a 4 is more impactful than a 3. Every single time you experience one of these, it increases your risk. Here in this slide, you can see, for example, that depression, if you have a score of 4, your risk for depression is 460% higher than someone who had a score of 0. This is very, very impactful to let us know that what happens to us in childhood has long life implication. This is the model of ACE. It depicts how we move from adverse experiences in childhood through risk behaviors, disease, and early death. On average, if you have a score of 6 or higher, you die 20 years younger. This is very significant that we understand how impactful what happens to us as children affects us in life. From birth forward, our experiences will impact us throughout life. And now the babies. These babies, at the time they're born, at the time of their first breath, they already have an ACE score of 1. Nothing else has happened but being born, and they already have an ACE score of 1. We're already starting the risk trajectory. Infants are born vulnerable to the parents and caregivers and the society that they are born into. There are amazing things if we had the time to go over to really understand what is happening that's so incredible in that first year of life. I just have to take a second and just tell you, just because we're so wonderfully made, that I think about it all the time, that when we're born, vision is not fully developed. Do you know where your best vision is? It's this distance. It's the distance of a caregiver feeding her child. That's where all the focus and learning is taking place. What's out there is too blurry. Everything that comes too close is blurry. Right here, this is the distance for which we take in our early world. Where attachment, relationship, learning how to regulate and interact with each other occurs. So I was speaking at a conference, and there was a neuro-ophthalmological, I can't remember her whole title, but anyway, she did neurodevelopmental ophthalmology. And she came to me after, and I was talking about this distance and how I'm so concerned that we're so consumed by technology that we're sitting over here looking at our technology and not at our baby and doing attachment. And what she said to me is, actually, you're going to see an increase in vision problems in infants because of texting. And I thought, why? Because when they grow up, they're looking at screens. What is that about? No, because, now think about how wonderfully we're made. Because, one, the mother's over here not paying attention, but we text best with one hand. So the mother will never shift the baby to the other side, and only one part of the visual field will develop. Do you see how beautifully we're made and all the things that happen? If we could even talk about in the first year of life, you know that growth curve of our growth, how steep it is. We have a very critical time of brain and body relationship and development that has lifelong impact, and that we can make a difference for these babies. If we want to impact global health, we must start with infants and children. In that first year of life, they have the most capacity to develop attachment, relationship, which we know is key to health and well-being, than any other time in life. That's when we form relationship without bias. But it is also the most critical time in life for survival, because although this is very hard to hear, the number one reason we die in our first year of life, if we go through the birthing process safely, is that our parents will kill us. It is the highest rate of mortality of any age group in terms of abuse. Everything starts with children, positive or negative. We can see a world full of intergenerational addiction, intergenerational abuse, or with our caring, with our involvement, doing things in a developmentally tuned way, we can see and build intergenerational hope and health. I asked my father to pray for this conference this morning as I was driving here. And he sent me a text back and he said, of course, I'm praying for the conference and that all of you will be able to learn from each other and do more for the needs of the world. But he said, keep in mind that true health is possible only when the mind is dedicated to the Lord. We, as a community, as an entity, a body that is committed to the Lord, and committed to those we serve, there is nothing that can stop what we do on behalf of others, because we offer the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Each of us in our communities, whether we're a church, an agency, or a part of a broader society, we have the capacity to change trajectories, and I implore us to do it for the infants. Make infant health, brain and body, a ministry in your corner of this world. We can give infants the opportunity to experience a positive body and brain trajectory, regardless of those early beginnings. In Testimonies for the Church, Ellen White wrote, "Angels of God are watching to see how we treat the vulnerable, who need our sympathy, our love, and our benevolence. Whatever you have done for the least of these, my brethren, you have done it to me." May God's blessing go with you. May you find a way to reach out to the most vulnerable of those that you serve. And may we work together to change the trajectories in the hope of the Lord. Thank you.